About ovarian cancer, final years. A couple of days ago, we talked about cervical cancer. And as you know, that is the most common cancer in Pakistan. And after that, after cervical cancer, we can say ovarian cancer is the next most common cancer in gynecology. And that is practically also we see it very commonly. Although cervical cancer is the commonest, but this is also not uncommon. And a lot of women will come with ovarian cancer, and usually they come at a very late stage. So the prognosis is the worst of all cancers, and this has the highest mortality also. So the objectives of today's uh, discussion will be, by the end of this session, final year students should be able to describe the etiology and risk factors of ovarian cancer. We will be talking about what is the etiology and what are the risk factors. And also, we will be talking about some of the protective factors that you should know, how to prevent ovarian cancer and what are the protective factors. And then another objective is that final years should be able to describe the important features in the history and examination findings of ovarian cancer, because you can get this in your OSCE also, and you might be asked to take a history of a patient who is suffering from suspected ovarian cancer. The third objective is that final year should be able to discuss the relevant investigations for diagnosis of ovarian cancer, and you should also be able to discuss with the examiner the management of ovarian cancer. What are the basic principles of management? You will not be going into a lot of detail about surgical findings and surgery, but the basic principles of management of ovarian cancer. And the last objective, which is very important, is that you should be able to describe the prevention of ovarian cancer. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit of introduction to ovarian cancer. If we talk about the incidence or prevalence, overall, worldwide, it is again not a very uncommon cancer, as 1 in 54 women will develop ovarian cancer in their lifetime. And overall, again, it is the second most common. If you take breast cancer as the most common cancer, then we say this is the third most common, because usually we don't take breast cancer as a gynecological cancer. But overall, among the women, if breast cancer is the most common, then cervical cancer is the next, and third one is the ovarian cancer. So important thing is that usually we diagnose it very late. 70% of patients are diagnosed at stage 3 or 4, and the most of the cancers, majority of cancers are epithelial cancers. And again, an important feature is that it has a very, very bad prognosis and a very high mortality rate because they're presenting at a late stage. And so the 5-year survival is not more than around 25 to 30%. Another important feature is that cervical cancer can be screened and can be prevented. But up till now, the research shows that ovarian cancer we are not able to screen for, and we are not able to prevent ovarian cancer, as we do not have very good screening tools for ovarian cancer. And so that is again very important, for that prevention is difficult. So finally, yes, I would like you to answer this question. What is the cause of ovarian cancer? What do you think is the etiology? Anybody of you should volunteer? चैट नहीं नजर आ रही है. Yes, final years.
मैम चैट मोर के ऑप्शन में आएगा ना.
हाँ, मोर के ऑप्शन में चैट नहीं नजर आ रहा.
मैम मोर के ऑप्शन में सबसे ऊपर चैट होगा.
मोर के ऑप्शन में नहीं आ रहा।
मैम फिर देखें नीचे जो आइकन्स आ रहे हैं ना उनमें आ रहा
हाँ
होगा।
हाँ, उसमें उसमें चैट नहीं आ रहा ना।
मैम देखें वैसे स्क्रीन पे है क्योंकि मेरे पास तो यहाँ पर आ रहा है चैट।
आपको आ रहा है? अच्छा
जी जी
मुझे
मैम।
बताएं, आपको आंसर नजर आ रहे हैं फाइनली? तो मुझे नहीं नजर आ रहा है। ये एक्चुअली लैपटॉप भी नया है ना, इसको
जी 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 मैम।
इसको अपडेट करना भी जरा मुश्किल है।
जी मैम
कहाँ इस पे
इसमें एक जगह पे क्वेश्चन आए हुए हैं। मैं
चैट?
आपको बल्कि सेंड कर देता हूँ चैट ना, आपको व्हाट्सएप कर रहा हूँ।
हाँ हाँ। So, what are the answers? I can't see the chat. I don't know where is the chat. नए लैपटॉप का ये मसला है ना, कुछ समझ ही नहीं आ रहा है। हाँ तारिक, बताएं इसका चैट कहाँ है?
मैम इसमें नहीं है चैट, इस वाले ऑप्शंस में नहीं आएगा। वैसे तो मैंने
हाँ
आपको सेंड कर दिया मैडम चैट, लेकिन आप मोर के ऑप्शन में जाएं। ये जो नीचे जहाँ पर ये माइक
हाँ
वगैरह
हाँ,
आता है
मोर
ना,
का ऑप्शन खोला हुआ है, उसमें चैट
म्यूट।
नहीं आ रहा।
नहीं मैम ये दूसरा ऑप्शन खोला हुआ है आपने।
मोर का यही है ना?
नहीं नहीं मैम।
मुझे मोर का और नजर नहीं आ रहा, मोर का ऑप्शन।
एक मिनट मैं स्क्रीन शेयर करता हूँ मैं अपनी ना।
फाइनली कैन यू हियर मी और नॉट? तारिक, इनको आवाज आ रही है मेरी?
जी जी मैम इनको आवाज़ आ रही है। मैम आपको मेरी स्क्रीन नज़र आ रही है?
नहीं आ रही ना, मुझे आपकी स्क्रीन भी नजर नहीं आ रही।
ओ,
Okay, so I can see your answers over here, final year. So these are a lot of important risk factors that you have mentioned: family history, nulliparity, BRCA1 and 2. These are all very important risk factors. But I wanted to ask you, what is the basic etiology? Why are these risk factors important? For example, if we talk about nulliparity, why is it an important risk factor? Or infertility is an important risk factor?
मैम आपकी
Or
स्क्रीन नहीं।
ovulation induction drugs?
मैम आपकी स्क्रीन नहीं आ रही।
मेरी स्क्रीन नहीं आ रही?
नहीं आ रही मैम, दोबारा से शेयर करें।
ये क्या हो गया? क्यों नहीं आ रही भाई?
मैम स्क्रीन को दोबारा से शेयर कर देना, आ जाएगी।
हाँ, मैं दोबारा से शेयर कर रही हूँ।
जी मैम।
आ रही है?
नहीं मैम।
क्यों नहीं आ रही?
पता नहीं मैम।
अब आ रही?
अब आ रही है मैडम।
ओके, आवाज आ रही है मेरी?
जी जी मैम आवाज़ आ रही है आपकी।
Okay, so let's talk about the etiology a little bit. Final years. I'm sorry, it's a new laptop, and my laptop was stolen a couple of days ago. So this laptop is entirely new for me, and I don't know how to operate it very nicely. So I'm sorry for the problem, but let's talk about etiology. So the most important etiological factor is that the number of ovulations that a woman has in her lifetime, continuous or incessant ovulation is said to be an important risk factor. And that is why when you're talking about your risk factors, those are very important, nulliparity and ovulation induction drugs, because all of these, they increase the risk of the number of ovulations. And that is why the risk of ovarian cancer is increased. Another theory is that it can also originate from the fimbria of the fallopian tubes. That is a relatively new theory, and a lot of new research shows that if the fallopian tubes of a woman are removed surgically, the risk of ovarian cancer can be significantly reduced. So that means that some of these cancers can arise from the fimbria of the fallopian tube also. So both of these are important etiological factors. One is number of ovulations. The more ovulations there are, ovulatory cycles, the more the risk of ovarian cancer. And secondly, the origin of ovarian cancer from the fimbria of fallopian tube. And so we have a lot of risk factors, like you people also answered very correctly, that family history is a very important risk factor. So age is also important because usually it's more common after 40 years of age. It's more common after 40 years of age, particularly after 45, and it's much less common or rare before 40 years of age. And if we look at the family history, then that's a very important risk factor. About 10% of cancers are said to be familial cancers or genetic cancers. And which history in the family is important? History of not just ovarian cancer, but history of breast cancer is also very important, particularly in the first degree relatives. If there's a family history of breast cancer, that's very important. Both BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes are very important. And another important genetic factor is the Lynch syndromes or hereditary non-polyposis colorectal cancer. So these are the families with multiple cancer syndromes. They can have colon cancer, they can have breast cancer, they can have uterine, endometrial cancer, and ovarian cancer. So even if there's a history of colon cancer, that is also very important. So when you're taking a history, keep this factor in mind that you have to ask about family history, not just about family history of ovarian cancer, but other cancers in the family, multiple cancers, and also particularly the breast cancer. So this is a very important risk factor. 10% of cancers will be familial. And then the other risk factors, like you mentioned, history of ovulation induction drugs, history of obesity, early menarche, late menopause, nulliparity. So all these are related to the number of ovulations. Because what happens with ovulation induction drugs, if some patient is complaining of infertility and we give her ovulation induction drugs, for example, we give her clomiphene citrate, what will that do? That can cause multiple ovulations. In a single cycle, there can be multiple follicle development and multiple ovulations, a risk of twin pregnancy, triplet pregnancy. So the damage to the ovary is more compared to a single ovulation. If there are 2 or 3 ovulations in one cycle, there are multiple puncture sites on the ovary and multiple repair sites, and that can give rise to increased risk of cancer. So the recommendation is that even if we are giving ovulation induction drugs to a woman with infertility, she should not be taking more than 6 cycles of ovulation induction drugs. So maximum cycles that we give to a patient with infertility, number of cycles should not exceed 6 cycles for ovulation induction. And then we go for further treatment, like we might go for assisted reproductive techniques and IVF and other things. So obesity is also a risk factor, and that can also work in a similar fashion by causing, for example, if she's a case of PCO and obesity, so she will be having infertility. And so cases with, because we say pregnancy is protective, so patients who have infertility, they might be having more number of cycles, number of ovulatory cycles might be more. as they are not conceiving and not getting pregnant. Early menarche and late menopause, what will they do? They will also increase the number of ovulatory cycles, number of ovulations, so the risk is increased. And similarly in nulliparity, because there's no pregnancy, which is protective, so the number of ovulatory cycles again can be more. So these are all just associations. So now what are the protective factors for ovarian cancer? Can anybody answer this? What is the most important protective factor? I can't see your chat somehow. Okay, so let's talk about the protective factors. The most important protective factor which can prevent against ovarian cancer is oral contraceptive pill. So this can be asked from you, and particularly when you are taking a history, if you take a history of contraception and the patient is telling you that she has been taking the pill, then you know that this can be a very good, important protective factor. As how does it act? What is the mode of action of the pill? How does it prevent ovarian cancer? Because we said the most important risk factor for ovarian cancer is number of ovulations. And what is the mode of action of oral contraceptive pill? When you give it as a contraceptive, what does it do? It inhibits ovulation. The mode of action for family planning for pill is that it inhibits ovulation, and so it reduces the number of ovulations by inhibiting ovulation, and that is how it prevents ovarian cancer. And similarly, we said pregnancy is protective. So how does pregnancy protect? Because for 9 months, the patient is not going to have ovulation. She will be amenorrheic for 9 months. That 9 months of pregnancy, there will be no ovulation. And so the number of ovulation is decreased. And that is how pregnancy acts as a protective factor. And because there's no ovulation, so the risk of ovarian cancer is reduced. Similarly, lactation is also a protective factor because, again, if the woman is breastfeeding for 2 years and she is amenorrheic also, or the number of ovulatory cycles are less, patient may be having lactational amenorrhea. So again, as the number of cycles is reduced, number of ovulations are reduced, so the risk of ovarian cancer is also reduced. And similarly, multiparity is a risk, protective factor because multiple pregnancies, multiple protection, less number of ovulatory cycles, less number of trauma to the ovary by ovulation, and similarly, tubal ligation is also a protective factor, and particularly if we do self-injectomy. Previously, we were doing tubal ligation, but now they're recommending that the whole tube should be removed if you want to reduce the risk of ovarian cancer because of the theory that it's arising from the fimbria of fallopian tube. And hysterectomy can also be a protective factor because when we do a hysterectomy and we cut and ligate the tubo-ovarian pedicles, what happens is that the patient is at risk of having a early menopause because the blood supply to the ovary might be compromised, and so the number of ovulations, overall number of ovulations in the lifetime of the woman will be less, and the risk of ovarian cancer will be also reduced. Okay, so now let's talk about how to take history. When you take history from a patient, how would you take a history? What do you think finally is? Chat नहीं नजर आ रहा. Yes. So what is important in the history? Why do you think this presents so late? By the time patient comes to us, to a gynecology clinic, ovarian cancer is already very advanced. It's already stage 3 or stage 4. That happens because usually the symptoms are very vague and patients do not have very acute symptoms or very severe symptoms. So what happens is that they complain of these non-specific symptoms, and mostly these are very vague kind of symptoms which are related to the bowel, gastrointestinal symptoms. They might complain of indigestion, feeling of fullness after meals. They might say there is indigestion and bloating sensation or constipation and similar vague symptoms, basically, or discomfort in the abdomen. And there can be pressure symptoms like frequency of micturition. So, what will the GP do? GP will just give symptomatic treatment, and GP will not suspect anything serious with this patient. They might not even advise an ultrasound. They might not think about okay, she might be having ovarian cancer. So that is why uh, usually this presentation gets neglected, and patients usually present at a later stage. So by the time they will present to a gynecologist, what will happen? The stage will have become very, very advanced. And when they come to us, they already have abdominal distension, maybe to a large extent due to ascites, and they might be having a lot of abdominal pain due to ascites, due to abdominal distension. They might be having pelvic pain, and again, pressure symptoms like urinary symptoms. And then the important symptoms that you have to ask in your history are loss of appetite and weight loss, because the cancer is already so much advanced that patient will have lost a significant amount of weight, and when you take history of weight loss, that will be very, very significant. Patient will be looking ill, very thin, fragile, cachexic, and she will say that she is not able to eat because of abdominal distension, as ascites also, and she doesn't have any appetite for eating also. So both the things together make her very weak and very cachexic, and there's a significant amount of weight loss. So these are the late symptoms when the patient comes to a gynecologist in already stage 3 or stage 4. And if this is stage 4, then there might be symptoms of distant metastasis also. She might be having symptoms of pulmonary metastasis also, like cough and hemoptysis. That can also be asked in the history. So let's talk about physical examination. When you do general physical examination, when you check the vitals may be normal or may not be normal. Particularly, the pulse might not be normal if she is anemic. So the anemia is not usually due to bleeding, because these patients do not have any vaginal bleeding, but because they are not able to eat and they have loss of appetite, they have a lot of anemia. And this anemia can give rise to severe anemia, can give rise to palpitation symptoms and dizziness and vertigo, and patient may not even be able to do any physical activities, and sometimes not able to walk also. So another important feature in general physical is her lymph nodes might be palpable if you do a general physical, and starting from supraclavicular nodes, the lymph nodes in the neck, they might be enlarged, and then significant weight loss which can be observed. And if we look at, if we do the examination of the chest, then we might find some evidence of if pulmonary metastasis may or may not be present depending upon the stage of the disease. And if the patient has come with pulmonary metastasis with hemoptysis, then there might be findings in the chest also. So then for abdominal examination, the typical finding will be of massive ascites, along with we might be able to feel a very large, a very hard, stony, it may be stony hard also sometimes. Typically, malignant tumors are hard and stony hard, and they are usually fixed. If you try to move the tumor from side to side, they are not able to move, as it is adherent and a fixed hard large mass, which might be reaching above the umbilicus. It might be reaching up to the xephisternum also. And then typically there will be findings of ascites, fluid thrill will be positive, shifting dullness will be positive. So that is the typical abdominal finding, and usually we diagnose on abdominal findings that if there is a typical massive ascites and a hard mass with a fluid thrill positive, then typically this is CA ovary. And then vaginal examination can be done, but there is no significant finding on vaginal examination. except that the uterus might be felt as the normal. If we are able to palpate, sometimes we are not even able to palpate the uterus because of massive ascites, but otherwise the uterus will be normal, and the fornices or adnexa will be all full because of the collection of fluid inside the peritoneal cavity. So, what is the most important investigation for ovarian cancer? Yes, finalists. Again, I'm sorry I can't see your chat somehow. But so let's talk about the investigations. Basically, the investigations, although we are going to talk about other investigations also, but the most important investigation is ultrasound of the whole abdomen and pelvis, and another one is the tumor marker, which typically we are talking about the epithelial cancers, which are the most common. More than 80% of cancers of the ovary are epithelial cancers. And we have a very important tool, very important tumor marker for epithelial cancers, which is CA125. So we always do these two investigations first, and they will give us the diagnosis. Definitely, these are the two most important investigations. So let's show you what the ultrasound looks like. So these are two different ultrasounds. So most common, if somebody asks you what is the most common tumor of the ovary or most common ovarian pathology or ovarian cyst, what is the most common kind, then what is the answer? Usually the answer is that your answer should be that the simple ovarian cyst or follicular ovarian cyst is the commonest. But how do you differentiate between a simple cyst, follicular cyst, and a complex cyst, which can be cancer? So that's a very important differentiation, which is usually done by the ultrasonologist, and a good ultrasound can tell us whether the cyst is benign, which is a very common finding because that happens due to normal ovulation. Normal corpus luteum can become enlarged, normal follicle can become enlarged due to fluid collection, and that will be seen on the ultrasound as a simple cyst. So if you can see this simple cyst, this is a simple cyst, this is a follicular cyst in the right ovary, and you can see this is totally black, and black means this is totally collection of fluid in a follicle or in a corpus luteum, and there's no pathology inside, there's no echoes or any complex septas or anything. So this is totally benign, and this can be managed conservatively. There is no need for operation, there's no need for surgical laparotomy and removal of this cyst, because this is a very common finding. Every woman will have this at some time in their lifetime, and they just need to be reassured that this will go away itself. There is no need for surgical intervention, and this will look completely black because of the fluid. If you look at this cyst, this is a complex, very complex cyst, and these colors are the color Doppler, which is also usually advised along with the ultrasound of abdomen pelvis. We advise color Doppler because that will tell us the vascularity, the increased vascularity, and you can see the septa. This is not a simple cyst like this one. This is not completely black. These are the echoes. These are the. This is a complex cyst. This is partly cystic and partly solid. Can you see the solid areas? These are the solid areas inside the cyst, and the solid areas indicate that this is a complex cyst and this can be cancer. And then when you put color Doppler into it, we request for color Doppler along with ultrasound. So the color Doppler will tell us about the increased vascularity and low resistance neovascularity, which is very good finding or important feature, diagnostic feature for malignancy. So this is the most important investigation that we do. We advise an ultrasound. So again, let's look at the investigations. Ultrasound of the whole abdomen and pelvis with color Doppler. So this is the most important investigations that we talked of, and color Doppler will also help in telling us about the neovascularity and the increased vascularity and the low resistance vascularity. multiple new vessels, which will be low resistance vessels. So the color Doppler will tell us about, and the ultrasound will also tell us about that the cyst is very complex. It has multiple solid areas. It can have multiple septas, and it can be a multiloculated and a complex cyst with a very high probability of ovarian cancer. So the next investigation that we advise is CA125, and then we correlate these two above investigations, and usually the diagnosis depends upon these two, 1 and 2, ultrasound, the color Doppler, along with CA125, that we can make a probable diagnosis, although not 100%, but a very good differential diagnosis of very high probability of ovarian cancer, and the patient can be counseled accordingly that we are suspecting ovarian cancer. And so when we give her the news, breaking the bad news, we have to tell her the risk of that this is suspected cancer, and she needs to have further treatment or surgery for this. So there are some other tumor markers which are also important, particularly if it is not epithelial cancer, then we have these alpha-fetoprotein also, and beta-HCG, TEA. But usually alpha-fetoprotein is a tumor marker for germ cell tumors, and beta-HCG is again a tumor marker for a different variety of ovarian cancers, but not epithelial. We know that ovary can have multiple types of ovarian cancers. Any type of cell can originate, any cancer cell type can originate from the ovary, from the germ cells, from the interstitial tissue, from the theca lutein cells, from the other interstitial cells, estrogen secreting tumors, and then we have teratomas, we have chorionic tumors like usually we have choriocarcinoma in the uterus, in the endometrium, but we can also rarely have choriocarcinoma in the ovary, and that will have increased beta-HCG levels. So the most important tumor marker, as we said, is the CA125. But if she's a younger woman and we are suspecting other types of cancers like germ cell tumors and other choriocarcinomas, we have to do other tumor markers like beta-HCG and alpha-fetoprotein. Okay, then other investigations are the routine investigations like CBC and urine DR and culture, and we have to do the kidney function test, serum creatinine, the chest X-ray, liver function, and later on, in order to further evaluate the metastasis level, how many intra-abdominal metastasis we have, we can go for CT scan, an MRI, and a PET scan. PET scan will also tell us about bony metastasis. So usually we don't do a PET scan. It's a very expensive investigation, and also it's not available everywhere. We don't have it available in civil hospital. So usually we only go for CT scan. These are all expensive investigations, and even in the public sector, they are not always readily available. It's difficult to make them available. So usually we do one investigation after ultrasound, and that is CT scan, which will tell us about the lymph node status, or whether there are enlarged lymph nodes, and spread will tell us about the stage of the disease with the help of enlarged lymph nodes. Okay, so let's talk about the staging of COPD. So for final years, for your exam, you don't need to go into the details of staging at undergrad level. Basically, if somebody is asking you about the staging, that means you have to tell us about the basic stages. Stage 1, 2, 3, 4. If we go basic stages, tumor limited to one or both ovaries, that is always stage 1. That means the tumor capsule is intact, it has not burst open, and the tumor has not spread to the peritoneum, to the abdominal peritoneum, and to any other viscera. So that is stage 1. And if usually we don't see patients at this stage, this is the best stage to diagnose and treat. If we diagnose at this stage, then the prognosis can be excellent, and 5-year survival can be excellent. But this is because this is asymptomatic stage, and patients don't usually present at that stage. And what is stage 2? The tumor involves one of both ovaries with pelvic extension. So stage 2 is already a bad thing. It's already, that means the capsule has already ruptured and the tumor cells have spread to the peritoneum, and there might already be peritoneal fluid and ascites with malignant cells. And if once the tumor is ruptured, then the cells already go into they can go into the omentum also, because the omentum is, the abdominal policeman, and it tries to cover any area of pathology. So it goes and covers the ruptured ovarian tumor and the ruptured capsule, and that's how it tries to limit it. But then if the omentum is involved, then that means it is stage 2 and stage 3 also, because omentum is an abdominal organ, so that becomes stage 3. So what is stage 3? Tumor involves one or both ovaries which spread to abdominal cavity. Once it goes out of the pelvic extension and goes into the abdominal cavity, it becomes stage 3 broadly. And stage 4 is the tumor involves one or both ovaries with distant metastasis. So even if the liver parenchyma is involved, that is also because that spread doesn't occur locally by local infiltration, that occurs through the blood spread. And similarly, the lung metastasis and pleural effusion, all these are evidence of distant metastasis, and that is stage 4. So this is the worst prognosis cancer, stage 4. Once the lungs are involved and the liver parenchyma is involved, then this is stage 4. And it's very difficult to treat. Even surgery will not work. And so usually that's the last stage where we can just give chemotherapy for symptomatic and for and usually prognosis is very, very bad. Okay, so let's talk about the management options or management. What's important in management? So as we know that an important part of management, even before we go for surgery, is the counseling of the patient, breaking the bad news, telling her that we are suspecting cancer. We have to tell her that honestly and clearly, so that the patient is mentally prepared that this can be cancer, so that she goes all the way for all the treatment options until chemotherapy and further follow-up. So counseling has to be very important. Like we talked about cervical cancer also, that patient has to know what is the stage of the disease very honestly. Whatever we find, whatever investigations we do, we have to tell her very honestly and very clearly. Okay, and then the next step is that patient needs to be admitted to the ward, and then the workup starts and all the investigations like CT scan and MRI and other investigations like chest X-ray and chest CT. Sometimes you need chest CT also if you're suspecting pulmonary metastasis and we are suspecting pleural effusion. We can do chest X-ray and then chest CT, and we can also do pulmonary tap in order to diagnose cytology and to be sure that this is due to metastasis and this is stage 4 or not, because that might weigh against the surgery. If there's pulmonary metastasis, then we might not go for surgery. So if the lungs are clear, chest X-ray is clear, and the stage is stage 3, up till the limited to the abdominal cavity, then we usually go for staging laparotomy. And the purpose of staging laparotomy is to stage the disease, to see the metastasis, to diagnose the extent of the disease, and also to reduce the tumor as much as possible. That is called cytoreductive surgery. And the aim of surgery is that no more than 1 centimeter of the tumor tissue should be left behind. So the maximum cytoreductive surgery will be a good option, will be a good surgical treatment, because then the chemosensitization will be better and the chemotherapy will work better. And the last step is the chemotherapy, and that usually continues for about 6 months or so. And although with this complete treatment, again, the prognosis can be better, but the 5-year survival is again not more than 30 to 35%. So what happens in the late stage? Supposing the patient has come with stage 4, she has come with distant metastasis. So then what do we do? Or even with liver metastasis. So then we go for chemotherapy, neoadjuvant chemotherapy for extensive stage 3 to 4 disease, because then we have to realize that we might not be able to excise the entire tumor if it has spread to distant organs and particularly to liver parenchyma. We will not be able to excise the whole disease, and so there's no point in increasing the morbidity, because the morbidity can be very disabling for the patient, and it might involve, if the gut is involved, bowel is involved, then we might have to go for bowel resection and other extensive resection, which might affect the quality of life of the patient, which is very important, and it must always be discussed with the patient that quality of life is going to get compromised with extensive surgery. So it's better to go for neoadjuvant chemotherapy first, and then we see how much the disease has resolved with chemotherapy, and then we can go for surgery if if we can, if it is feasible. So neoadjuvant followed by interval debulking surgery. And how do we find that this is because if we don't do laparotomy, then how do we confirm the nature of the disease? How do we confirm that this is epithelial cancer of the ovary? We try to confirm by tissue diagnosis or cytological diagnosis by biopsy. We do ultrasound guided biopsy of the tumor, and we do ultrasound guided tap of the ascitic fluid, and the ascitic fluid is sent for cytology. If we can see the malignant cells in the cytology, and if we can do the ultrasound guided biopsy, then we can diagnose that this is ovarian cancer, epithelial cancer, and then we can start with chemotherapy rather than surgery first, and then later on, if possible, then the surgery is performed later on. Okay, so this is the staging laparotomy. Typically, this looks very bad. So we always go through a vertical incision, and ideally, again, this should be done by a very expert gynae oncologist. Again, ideally, a subspecialist in gynae oncological surgery, who should be doing lymph node dissection also, and who should be doing this kind of a surgery. So, but usually we do perform in civil hospital, although we do not remove the lymph nodes because we are not experts in lymphadenectomy. But otherwise, we try to do cytoreductive surgery as much as possible. We also do multidisciplinary approach. We call the general surgeons also if there is something suspicious in the bowel, the tumor is adherent to the bowel and the tumor is involving the bowel, then we can go for bowel resection, and that is done by the general surgeons. So a vertical incision is done, which can be extended up till the xiphisternum. This will give us a good access to the tumor and also will give us a good visibility to stage the disease. We can see the liver, we can see we can feel the diaphragm, we can palpate the diaphragm and the anterior abdominal wall from inside. We can palpate the spleen, the kidneys, the entire bowel, everything in order to stage the disease about metastasis. So as soon as we do give incision, we enter the abdominal cavity, we see the ascites, and the ascites should be collected in the syringe for the cytology. Even if there's no ascites, we instill the normal saline into the abdominal cavity and then we aspirate it back. That is called peritoneal washing. So peritoneal washings means, supposing there is no ascites, we are suspecting malignancy but there is no ascites, so we can't take the ascitic fluid for cytology. So what do? We instill the normal saline. We put the normal saline into the abdominal cavity and then we take it back, because if there is malignant cells over the peritoneum, they will come into the peritoneal washings that we have instilled, and then we take it back. So that must be done before we move further, because otherwise the ascitic fluid will be contaminated by blood, and then we will not be able to do cytology. And so we stage the disease by visualizing the entire abdominal organs. And then once we have done that staging, once we have palpated the liver, palpated the bowel, We have done palpated the mesentery, the kidney, spleen, and the diaphragm, and everything. We have an idea about the number of metastases, and the metastasis. This is the momentum. Like we talked about earlier, what is the most important organ to be get involved? And the first organ which gets involved with the cancer, this is always the omentum, which covers the ovarian tumor and which gets involved. So even sometimes this looks normal, but usually there are microscopic deposits. So omentectomy is always done. TH, the aim of the treatment is to remove the tumor, and along with that, the uterus is removed. So we do a total abdominal hysterectomy, TH plus bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy. We remove the other ovary also, and both the tubes. Bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy plus we remove the infracolic omentum, even if it looks normal. This is not only when the omentum is involved with metastasis. Even without that, we think that omentum absolutely normal, but even then omentum must be removed because there might be microscopic deposits. So if the histopathology shows that omentum has microscopic deposits, that means again the stage is stage 3, because the abdominal organs, once they are involved, even microscopic disease of abdominal organs, that is also stage 3. So this is the minimum amount of surgery that we do: TH, VSO plus omentectomy. Along with this, because the general surgeons are usually with us in this surgery, so along with this, if they want to remove anything, if they think there's portion of spleen is involved or portion of liver is involved, they might do a partial lobectomy or partial removal of that particular area which is involved with cancer. They might do partial removal of the bowel also, and so as to remove as much as possible, as much cytoreduction as possible. And the aim is to leave no more than 1 centimeter of tumor deposits, because this is going to give us good results with chemotherapy. If we have left a lot of bulky disease behind, more than 1 centimeter, then the results of chemotherapy are not so good. Okay, so after surgery, what happens is that most of these patients are going to be referred for oncology department, and they will be receiving post-operative chemotherapy. Large majority of these patients will go for post-operative chemotherapy, which is usually 6 cycles. So for final years, you don't have to go into the detail of chemotherapy at all. But basically, if you try to remember the name of these two drugs, which I usually use, one is paclitaxel and the other one is carboplatin, which is the platinum drug. So 6 cycles of these two drugs, paclitaxel and platinum-based chemotherapy. Among the platinum-based, cisplatin and carboplatin are 2 options, but the better option is carboplatin, because that has a more better side effect profile compared to cisplatin. So, but you will not be asked chemotherapy in so much detail about side effects. You know, the side effects of chemotherapy are generally that there can be alopecia, and there will be definitely be hair loss, and the cell lines will be depressed. There will be leukopenia and lymphopenia, and there will be anemia, and all the cell lines are depressed, and there will be bowel symptoms, nausea, vomiting, everything. So general side effects you might know about chemotherapy. So the toxicity is important, and then after that, after these 6 cycles, we tell the patient for regular follow-up. So most of the patients will go into remission. So the time of remission may be variable, but usually we call them after every 6 months. Every 6 months, and then we follow them with, whenever they come back for follow-up, we do a CA-125 level, and then also we do a ultrasound and MRI of whole abdomen pelvis to see whether the disease is coming back or not coming back. So CBC, CA-125 and MRI or PET scan is done for follow-up. So then in the end, the most important, this is I think the very important aspect is always that we talk about prevention. We always talk about prevention because we know that prevention is better than cure. So how do we prevent? Prevention of C ovary, as we said, is very, very difficult, as we do not have any any particular screening tools. And usually the screening is not recommended for whole of the general population, but patients who are at high risk because of their family history. And we said family history is very, very important for COVD, and particularly patients who have family history of breast cancer and family history of multiple cancer syndromes. So those patients need to be screened regularly. And we do not even have genetic test in Pakistan. We do not have genetic test in Pakistan for BRCA1 and 2. So only on the basis of family history. If there are multiple cases of breast cancers in the family, for example, the patient has a patient's mother suffered from breast cancer, or sister suffered from breast cancer, and multiple other family members who suffered from colon cancer and other things. So those patients need to be followed up, and they need to be screened with the transvaginal ultrasound along with color Doppler, and they also need to be screened with CA125. So if we talk about a screening tool for COVRI, then again, history is the most important screening tool for every patient. Every patient we take a history, and once she is positive for family history, then they will be counseled about further screening tests. And we might also offer them that once they have completed their family, they might go for prophylactic oophorectomy in order to a prophylactic salpingo oophorectomy in order to prevent ovarian cancer. That will be a great step for prevention. So as we said, it's not recommended screening for COVRI, because why is it not recommended for general population? Like CS cervix is recommended for general population. Why is CS cervix recommended for general population? Because for CS cervix, we have a very important tool, which is Pap smear, which can pick up the pre-malignant stage of CS cervix. But here we do not have a pre-malignant stage for ovarian cancer. So that's the basic difference between screening for CA cervix and screening for CA ovary. You all know that CIN is the pre-malignant stage, and CIN can be picked up by Pap smear, and then we can go for colposcopy, and we can go on treating CIN so that we prevent CA cervix. But here for CA ovary, we do not have a pre-malignant stage, and there's no reliable screening test. Like, even if we go for transvaginal ultrasound, it's not possible for general population to come for transvaginal ultrasound and CA125 every year or every 6 months. It's not a feasible test, and it has not been tested in research, although the research is still ongoing, but it's not a very feasible test because there's no pre-malignant stage. And also, if there's a false positive screening test, that's going to give a lot of anxiety to the patient, and it might be because every test has a false positive and false negative rate. So the outcome may not be very good if it's a false positive test. Another important reason for not being able to screen COVRI is that it progresses very, very rapidly, because we saw that it spreads directly into the abdominal organs. As soon as the capsule ruptures and the cells they spill over the peritoneal cavity, they spill over the omentum, and then the whole of the abdominal cavity is immediately involved. So tumor which spreads so rapidly, it's so rapid extension into the abdominal cavity that the presentation is usually very, very quick. When you ask the history from the patient, she will only give a history of either 2 months or 3 months, or even 1 month sometimes. So it doesn't take a long time progressing from stage 1 to stage 4. It doesn't take a long time. On the other hand, when you talk about CA cervix, extension from CIN to CA cervix takes a very long time. It can take up till 10 years, up till 15 years also. So we have a lot of time in between to screen and to prevent. But here, if it's stage 1, tumor is limited to a single ovary, and we have not picked it up, what happens is, as soon as the capsule ruptures, it spreads into the pelvis, it spreads into the uterus and abdominal cavity and omentum. So we can't do much about preventing this progress or preventing the spread into the abdomen. So the screening for C ovary, usually there's a lack of survival benefit, and it's only recommended for very high risk patients who have a family history of breast cancer, who have a family history of Lynch syndromes, and who have a family history of ovarian cancer. So then, when we talk about prevention of COVD, it's very important to counsel the high risk patients. And how will you counsel them? Again, we have to individualize depending, because we can't do the genetic testing. So we have to individualize depending upon the risk factors and depending upon their age and their parity, because you know that we can't tell every, even if a young girl presents with the abdominal pain and we are suspecting everything is fine, supposing, but she has a family history of breast cancer. If she has a family history of breast cancer, what do we do? Can we tell her to go for prophylactic oophorectomy? Will that be feasible? Supposing she is a 20-year-old girl, young girl, but she has a family, her mother had died of breast cancer. Can we tell her to go for salpingo-oophorectomy? So practically, all these things are very difficult, but we can counsel her. We can counsel her that once her family is completed, once she has had 2 or 3 children, by the age of around 35 to 40 years, then we can advise prophylactic oophorectomy after 35 to 40 years of age, and after her childbearing is complete, then we can recommend for prophylactic bilateral salpingo oophorectomy. But that doesn't mean that she has to rush into marriage, she has to rush into having, we don't have to give her so much anxiety that go and get married immediately. The first person that you see, you have to get married and you have to complete your family. It's not like that. But she has to know that the course of this disease is that this can be prevented once we remove the ovaries and the tubes. So yes, so I can share with you one very popular movie star who is Angelina Jolie. You must have heard about Angelina Jolie, who at the age of 39 years, she went for because she had, her mother had died due to breast cancer and she was BRCA positive. She had an 80% risk of breast cancer and she has a very high risk of ovarian cancer also. So she went for bilateral mastectomy and she also went for bilateral oophorectomy. And the important thing is that she made it public also. She told the whole world about it, that I'm going for mastectomy, bilateral mastectomy. It must have been very hard decision for her. You can imagine that she was a movie star and she was a Oscar award winner and a very popular movie star, but she made it public, and she thought that it might be beneficial for other women if they know that it's okay. It's okay to go for surgery. Women are usually scared to go for mastectomy, prophylactic mastectomy. They're scared to go for prophylactic oophorectomy because of the social taboos and because of the marital complications and things that they think that they're going to lose their femininity. But actually, it can be life saving, because we know that prognosis is very poor and treatment is very difficult and 5 year survival is very bad. So these things are very important, that patients should be counseled about prevention, and once they have completed their family, they can opt for prophylactic salpingo-oophorectomy bilaterally in order to prevent ovarian cancer. Okay, so this was a case, but I don't know how we are going to discuss because I can't see your chat somehow. Final years. Yes, so 48-year-old woman. She's not nulliparous, she's para 1. She presented with a history of abdominal distension and pain for the last 2 months. How would you evaluate and manage her? So I think you can take up this case, and we can have a discussion with another Zoom meeting, or we can arrange another, if not face to face. I don't know how face to face we are going to go after 15th of September or not. We can go for that. Otherwise, we can have another Zoom meeting. And I don't know why I can't see your chat, final years, but that's very bad. And I would have liked to discuss with you how would you manage this patient, how would you diagnose how will you state the disease, how will you diagnose, how will you take history and everything. But unfortunately, we'll have to postpone this case discussion for later on. And so I'm going to show you a video now. This is about ovarian cancer. जी आपने फोन किया? अच्छा सॉरी सॉरी। लगता है। हेलो। हाँ जी। हाँ हाँ मैं आ रही हूँ, मैंने सर को बताया था कि अभी मेरा लेक्चर चल रहा है, मैं आ रही हूँ। मुझे उनका नंबर दे देंगे आपको? मुझे एसएमएस कर देंगे, इनको बोलेंगे एसएमएस कर देंगे। बहुत सारे कॉल्स आए। हाँ जीरो डबल थ्री टू टू वन फोर। ठीक है, मैं भी करती हूँ।
हेलो मैम। हेलो। हेलो मैम।
हेलो।
जी मैम, मैम स्क्रीन चली गई है मैम, स्क्रीन नहीं आ रही है आपकी।
हाँ, स्क्रीन बस वो वीडियो तो खत्म हो गया, वीडियो हो
जी
गया ना।
जी जी मैम, खत्म हो गया।
हाँ, बस यही वीडियो था।
जी मैम।
और दूसरा, अब मुझे चैट नहीं नजर आ रही, वरना मैं ये केस डिस्कस करना है फाइनल ईयर के साथ ना।
मैम तो वो आप एक काम करते हैं ना, मैं सबको अनम्यूट कर देता हूँ।
हाँ।
आप उनसे वैसे कर लीजिए केस डिस्कस।
कैसे
ठीक।
करूं?
मैं एक मिनट
मुझे।
मैम, मैं भी अनम्यूट करता हूँ, आप उनसे
अच्छा,
क्वेश्चन।
हाँ, अनम्यूट कर दें, हाँ ये कर लें।
हाँ
दैट विल बी
तो
गुड।
हाँ, वो जो है वो फिर इंशाल्लाह कर लेंगे।
ठीक है, ऐसा
कर
कर
दिया
लें।
मैम। मैम सबको अनम्यूट कर दिया मैंने।
जी, फाइनल ईयर, हेलो, कैन यू हियर मी? यस, फाइनल ईयर।
Yes, ma'am.
Now, did you see the case? How would you manage a case of a 48-year-old woman? Did you see the case, final years?
No, ma'am.
Okay, I'll tell you the case. Okay, this is a 48-year-old woman, para 1, and she has presented with abdominal distension for the last 2 months. How are you going to take her history? How are you going to evaluate her? How are you going to examine her? How are you going to investigate her and how diagnose her and manage her? Anybody? Anybody who wants to volunteer? So first of all, if you get this patient in the clinic, supposing you are in the gynae OPD and you have got this case, she's a 48-year-old, para 1. She's got one daughter, and her daughter is about 20-year-old. She's 48 years old, and she's complaining of abdominal distension and discomfort for the last 2 months. How would you take her history further now? Further history. What points are you going to ask her? What are the important points in the history that you will ask her? Anybody?
Power it off.
Final years, can you hear me? Hello? Yes? Okay. So I'm sorry again, the electricity had gone away, gone off, and now it has come back. Can you all hear me now? Yes, final years? Are you there? I can't hear you. Can you hear me, final years? Yes? Okay, so good. I've asked you a question now. I want responses from you people. I want the final year to tell me how would you take history from this patient who has presented with complaint of abdominal pain and distension for the last 2 months, and she's para 1 and she is 48 years old. Anybody? Either on chat or you can unmute yourself and you can directly talk also. Yes, final years? Anybody? Okay, so Mohammed Junaid is saying we would ask about menopause first. Okay, that's very good. So what do you think? She's 48 years old. Maybe she is menopausal, maybe she's not menopausal. That's right. That's a very good question to ask. But supposing she's saying she is menopausal for the last 2 years, although menopause can usually occurs around 50 years of age, but sometimes it can occur any time after 45 years also. So 48-year-old woman can have menopause sometimes before 50 years also. So that's good. That's important. What else? Any other questions that you would like to ask? What about her presenting complaint? Would you like to know more about her presenting complaint of abdominal distension? Would you like to ask her more questions? History of ovulation induction. Okay, very good. So all these are very important questions. You have to ask her about history of ovulation induction. We would ask about GIT symptoms. That's excellent. That's very good. So GIT symptoms are also very common. Patient might say she's not able to eat, she's not able to digest her food, and she might complain of bloating. All these are important. Very, very good. And what else? I want you people to tell me what is the history of presenting complaint. Would you like to know more about her distension, about her pain, if she's complaining of discomfort? Would you like to know about that? HUPC.
No.
Ji? I can't hear you clearly. So urinary frequency, yes, very good. So you will ask her about pressure symptoms like urinary frequency, or you will also ask her about any bowel symptoms also, any constipation, any problem with defecation. That's also very important. Abdominal distension, yes, excellent. So you have to know about abdominal distension, the duration of abdominal distension, how quickly it has progressed, and does she have any abdominal pain associated with distension or not? You will also ask her that. Very good. This is excellent. Who is this? So Mohammed Junaid, Recha is saying weight loss and loss of appetite. That's excellent. That's very important. You must always ask about weight loss, history of weight loss, because we said the weight loss is very, very significant. Patient is not able to eat and she has loss of appetite also. So because of that, weight loss, and this will always be positive in case of COVD. That's very important. Mohammed Junaid is saying pain, nature of pain, intensity, localized or diffused, aggravating and relieving factors. All these are very important features of pain that you always ask about. What is the nature of pain? What is the exact location of pain? What kind of pain it is, and whether it goes away with painkillers or not. Is it discomfort, vague discomfort overall or whole of abdomen, or is it localized to some particular focus? So that's very true.
Ini?
ज्वाइन कर देंगे क्लास? हेलो 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 हेलो